What happens when a street musician and a rich heir cross paths? Ethan never expected that Mia's raw voice and defiant spirit would uncover secrets buried for years. A dinner invitation turns into a life-altering revelation. Mia might be the long-lost daughter of Ethan's own mother. Can broken hearts heal, and can music mend the past? Where are you watching this from? Share in the comments and let us know. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to Stories of Hope for more tales that inspire and move your soul. Ethan Cross lived a life most could only dream of. A life of sprawling estates, luxury cars, and exclusive clubs where the rich and powerful played their games. But for Ethan, the glittering world he inhabited often felt hollow, a never-ending parade of pretense. Beneath the surface, he craved something real, something that couldn't be bought. One crisp autumn evening, while wandering the streets of the city, Ethan stumbled upon a scene that halted him in his tracks. A young woman sat on the edge of the subway stairs, her fingers moving over the strings of a battered guitar, her voice carrying a rawness that pierced through the city's noise. Her lyrics told stories of pain, loss, and survival. Each word felt like an unfiltered truth, and Ethan, who was used to people sugarcoating reality around him, found himself spellbound. When she finished, he clapped, a single sound in the sea of indifference. Startled, the girl looked up, her piercing green eyes locking with his. She looked as if she had seen every hardship life could throw and refused to bow to any of it. Her clothes were mismatched and worn, her hair an uneven tangle streaked with faded pink. And yet, there was an unyielding strength in her gaze, a spark of defiance that captivated him. "Nice voice," Ethan said, stepping closer. She raised an eyebrow. "Thanks, I guess." "You don't sound convinced." "I don't see many of your kind stopping to listen," she replied, her voice sharp and guarded. "What's your angle?" Ethan laughed softly. "No angle. Just thought your music deserved more than the empty sidewalk." She snorted, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Music doesn't pay the bills, rich boy." "Maybe not," he admitted, "but it matters. And your music, it's incredible." The girl looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to decipher whether he was mocking her. "Mia," she said finally, offering no more than her name. "Ethan," he replied, offering a hand she didn't take. Over the next few weeks, Ethan found himself returning to that corner, always finding Mia with her guitar and a song that made the world feel painfully real. He brought her coffee and food, staying longer each time. At first, she was wary, but his genuine interest began to wear down her defenses. She told him bits and pieces of her story, a childhood spent bouncing through foster homes, nights spent on the streets after running away at 16, and how her music was the only thing that kept her grounded. "You're not what I expected," she said one evening, eyeing him suspiciously over a cup of coffee he'd handed her. "Is that a compliment?" he teased. "Don't push your luck," she replied, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. One day, as they sat on the cold pavement, Ethan made an unexpected suggestion. "Come to dinner with me," he said. Mia froze, staring at him like he had just spoken another language. "What?" "I want you to meet my parents," he said, leaning back against the wall as if it were the most natural thing in the world. She let out a harsh laugh. "Are you insane? Your parents would have a heart attack if you brought someone like me home." "Maybe," Ethan admitted, "but I want them to see what I see. They donate to charities, talk about helping the less fortunate, but they've never met someone who's lived it. I think it's time they did." Mia shook her head, her expression unreadable. "You don't get it, do you? I'm not some project. You can't parade me in front of your parents to prove a point." "I'm not trying to prove a point," Ethan said, his voice quiet but firm. You're not a project, Mia. You're someone I admire, and I want them to know you. She stared at him for a long time, the walls she had built around herself battling with the flicker of trust she had started to feel for him. Finally, she sighed. This is a bad idea, but fine. If you really want to watch your mom faint, I'll play along. Ethan grinned, his excitement barely contained. You won't regret it. The night of the dinner, Ethan arrived at her usual spot with a shopping bag in hand. Here, he said, handing it to her. What's this? Mia asked, eyeing the bag suspiciously. Just something for dinner, he said. You can't wear ripped jeans to a place like this. She opened the bag to find a simple black dress and a pair of flats. She looked up at him, her expression a mix of gratitude and discomfort. You're really serious about this, aren't you? I am, he said. Reluctantly, Mia agreed. Ethan booked her a room at a modest hotel so she could shower and change. When she emerged, she looked different. The dress hugged her slim frame, her hair was clean and combed, and her eyes seemed brighter, though still wary. Well? She asked, crossing her arms. You look amazing, Ethan said, his voice soft with awe. When they arrived at the restaurant, Mia's nerves were on edge. The place screamed wealth, crystal chandeliers, white tablecloths, waiters in pressed suits. She felt out of place, like an imposter in someone else's world. Ethan's parents, Margaret and William, were already seated at a private table in the corner. Margaret, dressed in an elegant silk blouse, glanced up as they approached. Her polite smile froze the moment her eyes landed on Mia. For a brief second, her face registered something more than surprise, shock even, but she quickly masked it. Still, Mia caught the look, and unease prickled down her spine. Ethan, Margaret said, her voice cool but controlled. Who is this? This is Mia, Ethan said, pulling out a chair for her. She's my guest. Margaret's eyes flickered to Mia, taking in every detail. The cheap flats, the faded black dress, the wary defiance in her posture. It's lovely to meet you, Margaret said, though her tone suggested the opposite. Thanks for having me, Mia replied, her voice steady, though she felt like a deer in headlights. As the waiter approached to take their orders, Mia could feel Margaret's eyes on her, scrutinizing her every move. She tried to focus on Ethan's cheerful banter, but the knot in her stomach grew tighter with each passing moment. And when Margaret's hand trembled as she reached for her wineglass, Mia knew that something wasn't right. There was more to Margaret's reaction than simple disapproval. It was almost as if she recognized her. The table was thick with tension, though Ethan seemed oblivious to it, chatting enthusiastically about his latest project. His father, William, nodded occasionally, offering polite responses, but Margaret was uncharacteristically quiet. Her eyes kept darting to Mia, her expression flickering between discomfort and something darker, something that made Mia's stomach churn. Mia sat stiffly, feeling every glance from Margaret like a blade. She had expected judgment. What homeless girl wouldn't when thrown into a world of wealth and privilege? But this was something else. Margaret wasn't just judging her. She seemed afraid. Finally, Margaret broke the silence. Mia, she said, her voice carefully measured. Ethan tells us you're a musician. Mia nodded, her fingers tightening around her fork. I try to be. And where are you from? Margaret asked, her tone deceptively casual. Mia hesitated, the question hitting a sore spot. Nowhere, really. I've been on my own for a while. Margaret's hand trembled as she lifted her wineglass. Did you grow up in the city? Not exactly, Mia replied, her voice wary. I was in foster care most of my life, moved around a lot. The words seemed to strike Margaret like a physical blow. Her face paled, and the wineglass slipped from her fingers, shattering against the polished floor. "Mom!" Ethan exclaimed, springing to his feet. Margaret didn't respond. Her wide eyes were fixed on Mia, her breathing uneven. "What? What did you say your last name was?" Mia froze, her instincts screaming at her to leave, but she couldn't. Something in Margaret's reaction had rooted her to the spot. "Jensen," she said cautiously. "Mia Jensen." The name hit Margaret like a thunderclap. Her hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." "What can't be?" Ethan demanded, looking between his mother and Mia in confusion. Margaret stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. She moved closer to Mia, her face a mixture of disbelief and anguish. Your birthday. When is it?" Mia's pulse raced. She glanced at Ethan, who looked as bewildered as she felt. "Why does that matter?" "Please," Margaret pleaded, her voice breaking. "Just tell me." Mia swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "February 8th. Margaret gasped, staggering backward as if the words had struck her. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "It's you. It's really you." "What are you talking about?" Mia asked, her voice rising with a mix of anger and fear. Margaret's lips trembled. "You're my daughter." The room seemed to tilt, the world narrowing to the space between Mia and Margaret. Ethan stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like he couldn't find the words. "No," Mia said, shaking her head. "No, that's not possible. My mother, she died when I was 6. That's what they told me. She overdosed." Margaret's face crumpled, her sobs breaking free. "They lied to you. I didn't die, Mia. I was in rehab. Your father took you and disappeared while I was gone. I searched for years, but I could never find you. I thought I'd lost you forever." Mia felt the blood drain from her face. "No," she whispered. "You're lying. You have to be lying." "I'm not," Margaret insisted, stepping closer. "You're my little girl. I swear it." Mia stood abruptly, the chair scraping loudly as she pushed it back. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice shaking. Ethan finally found his voice. "Mom, is this true? How could you not tell me?" Margaret turned to her son, guilt etched into every line of her face. "I didn't know how to, Ethan. It's the darkest part of my life. Losing Mia, it broke me. I didn't want to burden you with it." "Burden me?" Ethan said, his voice rising in disbelief. "She's my sister, and you never told me." "I thought she was gone," Margaret cried. "I thought I would never see her again." Mia's chest heaved, her breath coming in short, sharp bursts. "You don't get to do this," she said, her voice trembling with anger. "You don't get to just show up and claim me like I'm some lost thing you forgot about. I spent my whole life thinking I had no one, and now you—" Her voice cracked, and she turned away, her hands shaking. Margaret reached out, her voice desperate. "Mia, please. I know I've failed you, but if there's any way I can make this right—" "You can't," Mia spat, spinning around to face her. Her eyes were wet with tears, but her expression was hard. "You don't get to make this right. You don't get to undo everything I went through." The room fell into stunned silence. William, who had remained quiet throughout, finally spoke, his voice soft. "Mia, I know this is overwhelming, but don't," Mia snapped, cutting him off. She turned to Ethan, her expression pained. "This is why I didn't want to come. I knew something like this would happen." Ethan shook his head, his voice pleading. "Mia, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know." Mia's lip quivered, but she said nothing. Without another word, she turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Ethan, Margaret, and William sitting in stunned silence. Margaret collapsed into her chair, her sobs racking her body. Ethan sat frozen, his mind racing, torn between chasing after Mia and staying to confront the mother he suddenly didn't recognize. But deep down, he knew one thing. Nothing would ever be the same again. The air outside the restaurant was cold, biting at Mia's skin as she rushed down the street, her breath coming in uneven gasps. Her mind was a storm of emotions: rage, confusion, heartbreak, and a deep, gnawing emptiness. She felt like the ground beneath her had been ripped away, leaving her flailing in free fall. "Mia!" Ethan's voice called out behind her, cutting through the chaos. She kept walking, her footsteps quick and uneven, but he caught up, grabbing her arm gently. "Let go of me," she snapped, yanking her arm free. "Mia, please, just talk to me," Ethan pleaded, his voice soft. "What's there to talk about, Ethan?" she said, turning to face him. Her eyes were red, tears streaming down her face. "Your mother thinks she's my mother. My whole life has been a lie. I don't even know who I am anymore." "You're still you," Ethan said firmly. "The girl who plays music that stops people in their tracks. The girl who's strong enough to survive things most people couldn't imagine. That hasn't changed." Mia shook her head, her voice breaking. "You don't understand. I spent my whole life thinking no one cared about me, no one even wanted me. And now she wants to act like I'm some lost treasure she just found. I can't do this." Ethan hesitated, his own emotions threatening to overwhelm him. "You're right. You don't owe her anything, but maybe, just maybe, this is a chance to get answers, to understand what happened. You've carried this weight alone for so long. You don't have to anymore." Mia looked at him, her walls beginning to crumble. "What if it's too late? What if I can't forgive her?" "Then don't," Ethan said gently. "At least not now. But don't walk away without hearing her out. Not for her sake. Do it for you." Mia stood there, the world around her fading into a blur. She hated the vulnerability coursing through her, but Ethan's words struck a chord. She had spent years running from her past, burying it beneath layers of defiance and music. Maybe it was time to face it, even if it hurt. "Fine," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I'm not promising anything." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him. "That's all I'm asking." Back at the restaurant, Margaret sat at the table, her face buried in her hands. William sat beside her, his hand on her shoulder, but his usual stoic demeanor was cracked, his eyes filled with worry. When Mia and Ethan walked back in, Margaret's head shot up. Her tear-streaked face lit with hope, but she quickly tempered her reaction, afraid to scare Mia off. Mia sat down, her posture stiff. "Talk," she said bluntly. Margaret swallowed hard, struggling to find the right words. "Mia, I can't undo the pain you've been through. I can't even imagine it. But I need you to know that I never stopped looking for you. Not for 1 second." Mia's eyes narrowed. "And what about now? You think you can just make up for everything with a few tears and apologies?" Margaret shook her head. "Number, I don't expect you to forgive me, and I don't deserve it. But I want to be here for you now. However you'll let me. Even if that means just giving you the answers you need and nothing else." Mia's voice was cold. "Why did he take me? Why did my father tell me you were dead?" Margaret's face crumpled. "Your father, he was angry. When I went to rehab, he said he didn't believe I'd change. He told me I didn't deserve you. I tried to fight him in court, but he disappeared with you before I had the chance. I thought I'd failed you in the worst way possible." The words hit Mia like a punch to the gut. She wanted to scream, to cry, to rage against the unfairness of it all. Instead, she asked, "Why now? Why did you stop looking?" Margaret's voice broke. "I never stopped. But as the years went on, every lead went cold. I thought I'd lost you forever. Seeing you tonight, it's a miracle I never dared hope for." Mia looked away, her throat tightening. She didn't know if she could believe Margaret, but the pain in her voice felt real. And despite herself, a small part of Mia wanted to believe. "I don't know if I can forgive you," she said finally. but I'll listen. For now." Margaret nodded, her tears flowing freely. "That's more than I could ever ask for." Weeks turned into months, and slowly, cautiously, Mia and Margaret began to rebuild something fragile but real. Margaret attended Mia's street performances, and though Mia still kept her walls up, she allowed Margaret into her life in small doses. Ethan became the bridge between them, encouraging Mia without pushing her too hard. One evening, after a small gig Mia had played at a local cafe, Margaret approached her with a hesitant smile. "You were incredible tonight," she said softly. Mia shrugged, but there was a faint smile on her lips. "Thanks." Margaret took a deep breath. "I know I have no right to ask, but would you let me help you record your music? You deserve to be heard, Mia, by the whole world." Mia looked at her, the offer stirring something deep within. For so long, she had fought to survive, never daring to dream. Maybe it was time to try. "Maybe," she said, her voice cautious but not closed off. Margaret's smile widened, and for the first time, Mia felt a flicker of hope. This story reminds us that hope can come from the unlikeliest places, even amidst pain and brokenness. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Stories of Hope, because every story of healing deserves to be heard. Love.